Welcome to Real Life Mentoring, where we explore real life issues to help you make an authentic difference in the world.
Hi, it's Chris and Christina. Thanks for listening today. We're really excited. We've got Dr. Phil Reynolds. Are you a doctor?
I'm not a doctor.
I'm calling everybody a doctor today. Dr. Chris and Christina.
Why did you say doctor?
Dr. Phil Reynolds.
Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil's on the call today.
Yeah. Is that working for you?
Let's back up and clarify.
Okay, maybe we should just start all over.
No, you start over.
So the topic today we're going to be talking about is emotional intelligence, and we have the emotional intelligence guru right here, live and in person. Phil, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Hi, my name is Phil Reynolds. I'm a leadership consultant and an executive coach, and our business is Reynolds Consulting, real original name. And in the process, the last probably 25 to 30 years have been doing leadership consulting training around the world, as well as coaching. Got certified about 22 years ago. And then probably 8 years ago, I went to my first emotional intelligence certification. But the thing that really began to drill down some of my knowledge around it, a little over 6 years ago, I had a brain aneurysm burst right between my eyes.
Oh, my word.
At a 6 to 8 hour brain bleed, was in the hospital 23 days, neuro ICU 21 of those, and left in a walker, couldn't read for several weeks, worked with 3 neurologists for over a year. So I became very curious about the brain. The neurologist I worked with gave me some just great insight to the brain and how that connects to how we deal with our emotions. And then last summer, because again, we always look for things to develop, I took a course at MIT on neuroscience and business to, again, help solidify what I want to know and discover around how our emotions have such a strong impact on our behavior and our results.
Wow. You guys have something in common, Phil and Chris. Do you guys want to talk like for 28 seconds on the thing you have in common?
You mean growing up?
Growing up.
Well, we both lived in a very small oil-filled town in Oklahoma called Velma, Oklahoma.
Velma, Oklahoma.
Yes. And I didn't know Phil personally. He was 3 years older than me, in class with my sister and cousin. And we talked earlier, I thought you guys were the cool ones, and I knew that I wasn't. So all these years later, I know when I came to one of your workshops on emotional intelligence, I think 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I forget now.
Yeah.
You're up there talking, and I thought, this guy looks familiar. And it's been since 1977, I think, since I had probably seen you. And as you spoke, and then you said something about Velma, Oklahoma, and I thought, I have to have met this guy because it's not very large. Anyway, but I didn't understand Phil. I knew you as Philip Reynolds. So
right.
Then I asked you and realized, and you looked at me, you thought, oh my goodness, you were that skinny kid. You're Belinda's younger brother. So there we go.
And by the way, Belinda and your cousin James, they were the cool ones. I was not, but
okay.
But you have a claim to fame here, Phil. Tell us what your claim to fame is with a famous person.
Do
I have to spell it out?
Yeah, Belinda, James, and I all graduated with Joe Diffie. I happened to play in a band with him, and of course, he went on to Nashville, having #1 hits, and I'm here. So, but he was a great guy.
Okay, we're just going to jump right in. Define emotional intelligence. What is it?
Well, I'll give you the official one, then I'll give you the one kind of our tagline. But it's emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. That's the technical. Our definition that we use is helping your emotions work for you rather than against you.
I like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. Just jump in, Phil, wherever you want to. Unpack that. Like, why is it important to be aware of this? If you don't have it, how do you get it? Just jump in wherever you feel like.
Because as mentors, and we train people to be mentors, this is a really important aspect of talking to people about. So,
yeah.
Absolutely. And mentoring someone, you both would help. But if you're the mentor, you absolutely want to have emotional intelligence. As you look at the difference between emotional intelligence, IQ, and personality, Personality is fixed usually by the time you're 12 or 13. IQ, in the sense of how you learn, is usually fixed at about that same time. Where emotional intelligence is dynamic. It's something that you can learn. According to the company Talent Smart, they say your emotional intelligence increases every 3 years, whether you want to it or not, just because the experiences you have. You can absolutely, because there's skills that you learn, then you can increase them faster till you get to about 69. Then apparently you just start stripping off and you say, hey, get off my yard kind of stuff. But the framework of it is, the one I use is by Dr. Justice. It's built on the framework that Dr. Izzy Justice is the one I use. So anyway, the framework is, you have self-awareness, which is knowing what's happening for us in this moment, which is where you want to start. In the book Insights, the author talks about 90-95% of people perceive themselves to be self-aware, yet only 10 to 15% are. So when I work with clients, or I'm working with someone, mentoring them, it's how do you help them develop their self-awareness of what they're dealing with in that element, or that time, that moment. The second skill is self-regulations. It's managing what's happening for us. Now that I'm aware of that emotion, then how do I manage that effectively to where the outcome is going to be good? The research says this, according to the course I took at MIT: what I think has a significant impact on how I feel, which has an impact on how I behave, what I do and what I say, which has an impact on results. We feel it first, but we don't always know the thinking behind it. So the self-awareness gives you the ability to pause, to stop. What's the thinking that's driving this emotion at this time? And then, not that you stuff the emotion down, you don't want to do that, or discard it. And it's telling you a signal. But how do I manage that effectively as I move and interact with other people?
Yeah. If we could pause right there, I'm thinking of somebody that I mentor, right? And I totally can see a growth area with self-awareness. How would I help her to see, hey, I don't think you're very self-aware, without saying, hey, I don't think you're very self-aware?
Yeah. Well, yeah, usually people don't respond to that well. It varies. If there's different assessments and tools you could use, but just to say, hey, what do you, when you're experiencing an emotion, what's the thinking behind what you're experiencing? So one of the assignments I often give my clients is, because the brain's drawn to the negative, and we have up to 27 different emotions an hour, which equates to about 378 a day. So because of that, taking the time to think what's behind it is exhausting, and it's a skill you can learn. So what's the thinking behind that's driving that? So, hey, I'd like you to just think about the emotions that you have. Pause for a second. Think about what's the thinking that's causing this emotion. Now, since the brain's drawn to the negative, most of the time, the thinking that we're having is negative. There's a book, I think it's called You Are Not Your Brain, but one of the books I read, it said, you can't control every thought that comes into your brain, but what you can control is what you do with that thought. And so that's the self-awareness process, is what am I feeling? And then, wait a minute, what's the thinking behind that? Then how do I manage that effectively? So that's an assignment I give. Hey, I just want you to write down every negative thought you have. Usually I get an email the second day saying, please let me stop, because there's so many. And then we say, well, what are the themes that you're having? What are the themes that seem to come up over and over again about what you're telling yourself? And to help them begin to understand, not every thought I have is true. So how do I realize I need to stop that, and then focus in on shift my perception of what do I want? Because oftentimes our negative thinking takes us off track, and that's where you refocus your outcome, what you want, and then you begin to develop a plan. The research that in the course I took at MIT, there's mixed research on positive affirmations. There's nothing wrong with it, But saying I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and darn it, people like me isn't going to change my behavior, that the brain's drawn to action. So the sooner I can think, okay, this is not going well, what do I want? And develop a plan, the sooner I get my prefrontal cortex engaged and start thinking about moving forward, as opposed to acting out unconsciously and reacting.
I was thinking, Phil, in the context of we are unapologetically Christian, we approach everything through this biblical worldview. That sounds very much like a process of renewing the mind. How
Yeah.
do you, which I think we have Sunday school fluffy answers, oh, just renew your mind, but that's a practical. I mean, God's practical too. So what you're saying to me really highlights that's process of renewing the mind.
Yeah, Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed, be transformed by the renewing mind, and you prove what the perfect will of God, perfect will and acceptable. Then also in 2 Corinthians, it talks about taking every thought captive.
Yeah.
In that process of realizing just because I think it doesn't mean it's true.
Well, I think that's so important. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's so good. We have a 19-year-old still at home, female. How many emotions did you say we experience in an hour?
27.
She probably does 220s. However, she's very self-aware of all these emotions that come in. And
Yeah, well, to be so young, she really is mature. Some areas in that area.
but sometimes she and other young women that I've mentored, they get hung up on, oh, I'm so bad, I had that thought. And I'm like, hey, the enemy's crafty. He wants to shoot. Thoughts, you didn't manufacture that thought. Am I right in telling that to a mentee?
Well, you manufacture it based on how you're seeing the situation. What I think about how I see my situation is causing an emotion.
Gotcha.
And again, Tasha Eurich wrote the book Insights I mentioned earlier. She said, as well as the research at the course at MIT, said that most of our behavior, 90 to 95%, is unconscious. We just respond and react. And since the brain's created for two things, safety and efficiency, primary safety, when I try to shift my thinking or try to do something different, it feels uncomfortable, which is not safe, and it's not efficient. And so I could unintentionally sabotage myself and continue that negative thinking, which could spiral me down even worse, as opposed to thinking, wait a minute, what am I thinking? How do I control that to see the situation? Not that I live in some type of, it's not real, but this is real. It's really happening. And it's okay to feel how you feel, but yet, is it true? That's the key. Is this true? And if it's not, how do I shift my thinking to what's real?
Wow,
So
that's good.
yeah, so just for clarification, the thought comes first, and then the emotion follows, and then the action. Okay.
Behavior. So yeah, so what I think impacts what I feel, which impacts how I behave, which impacts the results I have.
Give an example using myself. So I grew up, and I realized a number of years ago, God showed me that I battled a fear of loss, because grew up in the home of an alcoholic. We lived in poverty. We moved all the time, and there was never closure. So we didn't have time to say goodbye to friends, houses, schools, nothing like that. So without realizing it, this is developing my thought life, my brain. So there's always some kind of loss. So as an adult, a husband and a father at this point, I'm battling a fear of loss. And did not realize that to begin with. But then when I did realize it, how much it was controlling me.
Right.
So can you speak into something like that, Phil?
Well, you think it. So, right. You feel, so is it true though? Is it not what you're feeling is true? It absolutely is. But is the thinking true? And if I can begin to say, wait a minute. So part of cognitive flexibility, which is part of developing your emotional intelligence, is you identify deceptive brain messages, you shift your perception to what's true, what's reality. And by the way, in the midst of that, you could still be feeling afraid, but what's the outcome that you want? And then how do I move forward? So for example, if Christina, you think, hey, I'm going to lose Christina because I'm being such a bonehead right now, she's going to leave me. Well, that's not true. So reframe, shift your perception. Hey, I made a mistake today because I said some things I shouldn't have said. what do I want? I want to learn how to communicate to her in an effective way where she knows that I love her so much. I would not want to spend life without her. Now, what will I do?
That's so good.
Well, one thing I learned over the years is that this thought of fear of loss used to control me,
Mhm.
therefore live with me. But over time, it visits me still, but it doesn't control me anymore. And so I guess without realizing it was emotional intelligence, I've taken those thoughts and not allowed those to rev up my negative emotions, because in the past it would take me to the extreme.
Right.
This will always lead to this.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that's actually painful, and you never win that way internally.
No. Whenever you're driven by your emotions as opposed to your values, I mean, obviously we want to be values driven, but yet oftentimes our emotions driven, so we don't even realize that it's our thinking that's causing that. Because I would never think that about myself, but we do.
Mhm.
Okay.
You said something about the brain and its two functions. Could you unpack that a little bit? Because I see when people are in transition, that tension of, I want security, and then the other function, I'm sorry, what'd you say? Oh, feeling safe, and then
Efficiency.
efficiency. So,
So the
yeah.
brain's primarily drawn for safety, to keep us safe. So that's why when we see a threat, we have that fight flight kind of thing. It impacts the amygdala. The amygdala is the center part of your brain. There's one on each side of the lobes of your brain, about the size of an almond. There's a fluid that goes in for about 5 seconds, and it stimulates us. So someone you're driving down, see for you it'd be I-35 there in Norman. Someone cuts you off, and your brain reacts immediately to protect yourself. Now, what happens after that is up to you.
Okay.
Then you say, hey, I'm going to chase them down and cut them off. And all of a sudden you've had an emotional hijack. Your emotions are taking over. You shoot the international sign of disgust, whatever it may be. Your emotions have taken over that point, as opposed to learning how to calm yourself in that moment. So something like a move is a huge stress. Something like a change of jobs is a huge stress. Getting married is a huge stress. Getting a divorce is a huge stress. Most of our lives is filled with stress.
Yeah.
And so it's always understanding that that's okay. It's part of life, but how do I manage that? Realizing this is not a threat. This is an opportunity. They did some research. This is from a book on resilience I read a couple months ago. They showed 3 800-meter female athletes in the Olympics: gold, silver, bronze. And the question that they asked, as they showed the picture, 2 of these were happy, 1 of them was not. And you look at the pictures, you can kind of tell. But and what was interesting is most of the time when I ask the question, people say it's the bronze. It's the silver. I had someone yesterday say it was the gold. And but the gold's like, hey, I'm on top of the podium. I'm the fastest person in the world. Bronze was like, I'm so thankful to be here. Silver, though, they said had an if only attitude. If only I'd have started faster, if only I'd trained harder, if only I'd stayed up with the lead sooner, if only I had a sooner kick. Where the 3rd place winner had an at least attitude. At least I made it to the Olympics. At least I'm on the podium. At least I got a medal. And so that little slight framework of how you see your situation, because when you have an if only attitude, you can never change it. Or if you look, at least there's an element of gratitude that you have. At least this is happening. And the research around the brain says gratitude actually shifts the brain's thinking and process. So that helps us. Again, it's not trying to discount what we're feeling. It's not discounting what we're going through, the stress of that. But yet, how do I control the amygdala of taking off? Some of that is just being aware of what stresses you out that would cause that feeling, I feel unsafe. Or for a change, if I'm learning how to do something new, this doesn't feel familiar, so I don't like that, which it's not efficient.
Gosh, makes me think of Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinks, so is he.
Yeah.
That's been a tension I've had to personally wrestle through, just my faith expressions, like, there for a while, this name it, claim it. I thought, oh gosh, you just can't. But when I think on the principles of God and his truth, my brain gets into alignment. It's not just scriptural platitudes. There's science behind what we think.
Right.
Really matters.
If you look at when you try to get someone to change, so I don't know if it's happening as much as it used to, but churches were trying to, especially years ago, hey, we're going to change our music. Oh my gosh. And so we have a tendency then as church leaders sometimes to say they're not spiritual. No, they're going to, they don't feel safe because you're changing what they know, and it's not efficient. I can't sing off an overhead. I want to see this music. I can't read it, but yet I like to open up a hymnal and see music. So it's that element of that fight flight kind of thing that happens even when you look at that. So you look at a mentor part. Hey, I'd like you to check on some challenges.
Yeah.
That, do I feel safe in this? And so that's trust absolutely is a foundational piece of that, being a mentor, right? And it's going to be really efficient. Am I going to get the results that I really want? I don't know.
One of the things I've learned to do, Phil, using body language. So with someone being emotionally feeling secure. And so if I'm mentoring a guy and we're just getting to know one another, and it's at the point where he's going to share some difficulty, some personal aspects of his life that he's probably never shared with anyone else. I can see it on his face and his body language. And I've learned to adjust my body language to his. I may actually turn my chair, if I'm at a cafe, away from him. So I just turn back and look at him occasionally. So he doesn't, as he's expressing his emotions, and he's maybe never done this before with another man, that he doesn't have to look me right in the eyes the entire time.
Right. Now, Chris, I'm so proud of a VA alum. So that's on the other side of, so I looked at self-awareness, self-regulation. The other side then is social regulation, or social awareness, which you just described. That's knowing what's happening to the other person.
Okay.
Help them feel uncomfortable. So mirroring is a great way for social awareness. Empathy is a great skill around social awareness as well. There's 3 types of empathy: cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and then action. So I feel I do. Depending on your role with someone, you at least need to cognitively understand what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're feeling, and you can articulate that. So, Chris, what you think is this. Christina, you're what I hear you saying is this, or you're frustrated, you're concerned. And what's nice is when I can acknowledge what someone is thinking, feeling, or saying. If I'm wrong, they'll redirect me. I'm not thinking this, it's more like this. No, I'm not saying this. No, I'm not frustrated, I'm concerned. Yeah. And it gives me the ability then to ask a better question to help them move forward. But oftentimes people think empathy it has to be tied to emotion. It doesn't always. You can certainly feel the way, or to action. All 3 of those are important, but they're not all 3 necessary in the moment. And then social regulation is managing what's happening for others and yourself. Think of it like a triangle. At the top of the triangle is what's required. This is what's required of us. On the right-hand side of the triangle is Chris. On the left-hand side is me. How do I then regulate to where Chris can get what he needs? I can get what I need to get what's required. And what's happened sometimes in our conversations is we triangulate and we go at the bottom at each other as opposed to focus toward the outcome that we want. And so emotional intelligence helps in the process of framing that out.
Could you unpack that? Like, I'm all about role playing or giving a story. Like, let's say married couple, they each have their things. How do they get to the tip of the triangle?
So great question. You focus on the outcome as opposed to just my need. So social regulation doesn't mean I suspend my need, but I'm aware of it. It's also understanding that's where the acknowledgement. So, sweetheart, what you're saying is this. So you think we should do this. So you're concerned that if we spend this much money, to that way, yes, because people want to heal. People want to be heard, and they want to feel valued. So part of the way we can do that in social awareness and social regulation is connecting with them of what their need is. That then the more I can understand what their need is, then the more we can jointly come to the outcome of what's required in that process. And what's the tendency for us as humans is I just focus on my own needs. The other side of that too, Christina, is that this came from the course at MIT. The brain wants to be right. So just as every human wants to be right. And our brain is drawn to things that will reinforce our beliefs. And so we're always looking, that's why we watch the news channels that we watch. And we watch the news channels because it supports our belief, the framework that we have around life. So when I'm trying to talk to my spouse, then I think this, they think this. How do we come together rather than going against one another at the bottom of that triangle? How do we move forward to the top of that triangle to the outcome that would mutually benefit us both?
That's great.
Trust is really important in that situation. Yeah, very much. Okay, this is not judging someone, but would you say you're pretty good about walking into a room and assessing if someone's has emotional intelligence or not?
Well, I always tell people no.
But
I'm always watching people. I'm people. I just find people extremely curious. The first thing I look for someone is what their behavioral profile is. Are they more extroverted? They're introverted? Do they seem to want to control the environment, accept the environment? And then I watch to see how they operate with other people in that process. But I'm not always doing that.
Well, the reason I asked this because this happened 2 days ago. We're traveling back from Missouri, and we stop at a gas station, and I put my credit card in the pump, whatever, and it won't receive anything. And I said, tried it again, and I found myself getting frustrated, trying to get back on the road. All right, get over myself. It's just a few minutes. So I'll go inside, and the cashier behind the counter, she said, "What do you need?" And I said, the pump's not working. I don't know what to tell you. It's been messing up all day. You might try another one. And I just thought, oh my goodness, my chest got tight. And I thought, so I went back outside and I moved around to another pump and filled the tank. Christina had been inside as well. And she gets in the car and I told her what happened, and she had a similar situation. So it's not judging someone, but I would say that woman probably doesn't have emotional intelligence. Is that fair to say?
Well, I don't know. She could be having a bad day, but the question is she self-aware? Can she do self-regulation? There may be some skills that she wants to develop. So everyone has some elements of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's like I use this analogy for leadership too. Everyone can be a leader. I play the piano. I'm never going to play at Carnegie Hall. And so there's different levels of skill and emotional intelligence that people can use, some at the lower level and some at the high level in practice. But the other thing too is the thing that we have going against us. One of our biggest things is our brain, which is our ego. So when I left the hospital, I met with 3 of my neurologists in 1 week, which is, I wouldn't ever recommend that. They're not a very humorous, fun group. But they read the report. Mr. Knowles, I read your report. You should be dead. Are you depressed? So first time, second time, third time. And third time I asked, and because my wife put me on a trial program. So why are you asking me? Well, that's one of the common themes that happens is when someone has a stroke or an aneurysm, they get depressed. I said, no, I'm just grateful I'm alive. And so I started intentionally at night saying, what did I do well today? And like, for example, when the physical therapist came over, he goes, all right, we're going to do some chair squats, which is basically sitting in a chair, standing up. And I did 2, like, yes. I said, this is what I did well today. And I didn't put a but behind it. This is something that didn't go well today. And then tomorrow I'll do this instead. So I shared with one of my neurologists what I did. He goes, that's great, because you're telling your brain, do this again. Don't do this, and this is how you'll do it.
Yeah.
Now, as much as I do that, and I still do that every night, I was in Phoenix, Arizona a few years ago, probably 3 years ago, and did a training, 1-day workshop there, got on a plane late, flew into Dallas, Texas, didn't get in until 12 that night. By the time I got to the hills, about 12:30, and I stayed at a Marriott. I'm a lifetime titanium at Marriott. At that time, I was with Ambassador. And so when I checked in, the lady she wasn't very cheery. And I said, hey, how you doing? And she didn't even say anything, didn't greet me. And I know that when you're at Marriott Rewards, they say, hey, thank you for your loyalty, da, da, da. Do you want points? And I said, now, she didn't say anything. She goes, here's your, I said, did you give me my points? Sir, your points are in the system. I said, okay. So turned around, walked to the room. And I remember walking away thinking, I can't believe that. She was so rude. By the way, all ego.
Yeah.
All ego. I'm going to talk to the manager tomorrow. I go up to the room. I'm still stewing over how I was treated by this lady who was working at 12:30 midnight. So I'm sitting, get to bed finally. I'm laying in bed. I go over my 3 questions. What went well today? Oh, training went great. Da, da, da. That's phenomenal. People laugh. They cry is better than cats. And second, what went badly? Nothing.
Better than what?
Better than cats. And what went badly today? Nothing went badly. This is a great day. And my conscience or the Holy Spirit, I'm not sure which, said, what about that conversation you just had? And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm the customer. What do you mean the conversation I had? She didn't say anything. I wasn't rude. I was trying to be, but were you kind? Kind. I'm the customer. She should be kind to me. And were you considerate of her situation? And so I really got convicted of that. I said, okay, if this happens again, which by the way, it was a pretty safe bet it wouldn't, this is how I would operate. So the next morning I get up early. I was training for a marathon at that time. I get up early, go work out. I forgot toothpaste. So I went to the front desk. Guess who was still there? She was there.
Wow.
Hey, this is my next time. So I totally changed the situation, how I approached her. And I said, do they ever let you off work? And she looked up at me and kind of had this tired smile. She goes, I get off in a couple of hours. I said, man, I'm so impressed that you're able to work this late at night. I could never do something like that. And then she said this, I'm a single mom. And she said that it changed my perception.
Yeah.
And I said, well, tell me more.
Yeah.
And she's told me about, I'm able to go home and have breakfast with my daughter before we send her to school. Then I sleep, then I get up and I'm able to pick her up and help her with the homework. We have dinner, put her to bed, and then I come to work. And, what a great testimony to your daughter. And I said, I appreciate so much the work. May I have your name to tell your manager what a great job you've done? And she kind of blushed and said, well, yeah, if you don't, yeah, sure. Which I did. And so it's that element of realizing that I may not get it right the first time. If I have the opportunity to get it right the second time, I can. And so having some type of feedback mechanism for yourself to evaluate how you're doing on your skills, as opposed to say, you may just want to try a different pump.
Yeah.
And so that helps people then begin to begin. That's why you always want to start with self-awareness.
I love that story. And I think that could be a whole podcast of situations that we allowed the Holy Spirit to speak to us. And then we actually did what he told us and turned the situation around. Because I keep hearing that emotional intelligence and the self-awareness and the social awareness, all of these aspects, that's really how we can communicate the gospel and to be loving and kind. I want to piggyback on your story, not that I'm trying to top your story, but to further illustrate, I think Christians walk around and we don't see the grouchy hotel clerk or the grouchy gas pump clerk as opportunities to share the love of Jesus. So that same woman that was so grouchy to Chris, I was in line to buy a beverage. People in front of her obviously knew her and they said, gosh, that pump has been out there a long time. There was a diesel truck. She said, yeah, we're out of gas on most of the pumps and I just want them to get out of here. I thought, okay, she's stressed. And then when it was my turn, she said, that it? I mean, she was just like, well, I happened to notice that she had this beautiful nail color and she did not strike me as a frilly girl. She was hardcore. So I just said, wow, I love that nail color. And she looked at me and she said, really? I said, I do. And she said, well, I got green because I thought it was closer to St. Patrick and, negative. And I was like, well, I really like green. And she said, you know what? Next time they've got this sparkly blue and I want to try out the sparkly blue. And I was like, I love blue too. I said, I bet that would look great with your skin tone. She goes, I'm trying it next time. So I didn't get a whole lot of warm fuzzies. I didn't stop. I didn't present the gospel, but I just thought, I looked at her different. And I just think there's so many opportunities. I want to share another quick one.
Well, let me interject on that same story for a moment. So
Yeah.
I was initially irritated. Okay, the gas pump's not working. I had to
Right.
walk in. I mean, life is tragic, right? I had to walk into the store and ask for help, and she was rude. And I kept my facial expression calm when she was doing that to me.
Which Chris Elledge has difficulty doing. He wears his little expression.
Yes, I can. But so I walked back out, and by the time I got in the car, it's like, Chris, what's her situation? You don't know what she's going through.
Right.
And so what aspect of emotional intelligence is that when you go from, like, you and I got frustrated and wanted to report that person to going, what's the bigger picture here?
That's good.
What aspect of emotional intelligence is that? Is that self-awareness? Okay. All right.
That's good.
What were you going to ask?
And Chris, that's why I ask myself those 3 questions still at night to become more aware of what's going on in my day.
Okay.
This is such a good a stopping point, but then I'm thinking of 1,000 other things that we could think about.
That's a lot of things. 1,000?
Probably more than 1,000.
Okay.
I just streamlined it.
Okay.
Anyway, I wrote this down. Where's my when you have seen me looking down, it wasn't because you were boring. I was writing things down. I just thought, okay, everything that you're talking about so illustrates the fact that if we just examined the brain, we are so fearfully and wonderfully made. My word, just in our brain, the things that God took deliberate intent and science and intelligence to wire that brain and then told us to transform that mind. Yeah, it's just amazing. Anything else that you want to share to wrap up?
There's and we won't have time to talk about it, but that's why the stories that we tell ourselves are so critically important. Everyone has a story that they tell themselves. And so, Chris, kind of going back to what you said earlier, you had a story that kept running through your mind because of our experience. And so if I can the more I can understand my stories and my thoughts, because stories lead to thoughts. And the more I can understand my story, and our stories work for us until they don't.
That's great. Chris,
one of the things that we teach is my life, my story. It's a tool, and it's helping people discover their own story for the first time. They will remember certain things. They'll quickly say this about their past, present, or something to help for the future. But when you take time to dialogue with them, they realize, I never thought about that in my life. I never thought about this.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's good. Wow, Phil, so much stuff here. Thank you. The takeaways for me are just, we weren't haphazardly brought to life. Like a intelligent creator formed our brains. I'm just going to encourage listeners to go back, listen to this again, take notes, and we'll have Phil back on here again. But just thank you so much for imparting your wisdom and just giving some really great tools to people who are listening. So,
for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Thanks. We want to thank you as always for listening. If today was helpful, if something that you listened to was helpful, we would really love it if you would go to Apple or Spotify, leave us a review, download, subscribe, and for all things related to podcast, if you'd like to give a financial contribution to help us continuing bringing this sort of broadcasting to you, just go to FahrenheitMentoring.org.
Hi, this is Chris Corral, producer of the Fahrenheit Real Life Mentoring Podcast. This podcast is produced through a partnership with the Confetti Corral Boutique and Michelle Corral Realtor. To find out more about these businesses who support our vision and ministry, go to confetticorral.com or find them on Facebook.